This is the Karl Gerber Workplace Lawyer Show being broadcast live from the Employment Lawyers Group Sherman Oaks with a proud appreciation for the Southern California Association of Broadcasters. Tonight, we're going to talk about Los Angeles history, which everyone knows is one of my personal hobbies, and we'll try to figure out if there's an angle in there for labor law. Now, as somebody who has studied Los Angeles history my entire life, I've come to the conclusion that there are very few people out there who, if they had not existed, we wouldn't have LA as we know it. And I don't mean a coronavirus infested town, I mean the great city of Los Angeles that became a world-class city not too long ago, but was a major city before then. The people I want to talk about are the man who donated the land to Griffith Park. And I also want to talk about Isaiah Hellman, who is the financier of the West, who probably most of you have never heard of. I will talk briefly about the Chandlers of the Los Angeles Times that were the boosters of the city. And I will mention William Mulholland, although I don't feel that the city wouldn't be where it is without him. I think another city engineer would have designed an aqueduct. So I want to take you back in time. I want to take you back in time to a different century and a myth about Los Angeles. There's some myths about Los Angeles, not just one, but I find this to be one of the most fascinating myths about Los Angeles. And I used to think it changed the course of how Los Angeles was developed, but I think more so the donation of Griffith Park did. And so, some years back, I would spend a lot of my time researching the Los Feliz Curse. Have you ever heard of that? Well, Griffith Park was cursed land. I even wrote a novel called Legend of the Lizard People, which mixed together three of Los Angeles's most famous myths, one of which was the Cursed Ranch. So we're going to go back to 1784, a time in which the Spanish government began making land grants. These grants of land became known as various ranchos. The names of these ranches exist today in street names and the names of cities. For instance, you've probably heard of San Fernando. Well, that was Rancho San Fernando. So on March 22nd, 1843, a grant was made by the then Mexican governor to Maria Ygnacio Verdugo, a name you've probably heard of in Glendale, of a tract of land known as Los Feliz Rancho. Rancho Los Feliz became one of the numerous ranchos of the era. Once California became a state, the grant got confirmed by the United States. Being one of the later ranches to have existence through a land grant, Rancho Los Feliz, was one of the smaller land grants. Much of it was through a hilly section that today I think we know as Griffith Park. However, the Los Angeles River ran through the rancho, and it was within reasonable distance to the Pueblo, that's the city, down there by Olvera Street. Major Horace Bell is a name you hear in Los Angeles history, and he's one of my favorites, although I think he might have been a little bit anti-Semitic, and we know what I am. Well, Major Horace Bell was also a lawyer. He claimed he was, living in mud huts, whipping people, or almost getting killed by whips, all kinds of crazy things. He lived from 1830 to 1918, and he was, like I said, an early member of the Los Angeles Bar. He was a lawyer like me. And Georgia was his wife, and she is the namesake to Georgia Street in downtown Los Angeles, where if you listen to Dragnet, you'd always hear about the Georgia Street Hospital. And we made some jokes about that back on episode 84 of this show. You can find on the Karl Gerber with a K channel on YouTube in a very popular episode called Hunt for the Soldier's Genital. Mother is phone sex operator and ASMR porn legend makes genitals. Well, it was crazy, and we actually went to Jack Webb's house. It's not far from Employment Lawyers Group, and that's the house he had when he was doing Dragnet in Studio City. He later moved to Encino, but we are getting a little bit sidetracked. We're going to go now and talk more about Horace Bell, who had a newspaper called The Porcupine between 1882 and 1888. Most historians attribute the Los Feliz Curse to Bell. Some people think that Griffith W. Griffith told him the tale. That's the man who wanted to get rid of the land, or was it Griffith J. Griffith? Now I'm confused. Well, at any rate, the tale has elements of the displaced Californian families and the ranches lost to loan sharks, which was a big thing going on. These Spanish families that were pre-California got their land grants, and unfortunately they started getting into loans, and the loans had usurious interest rates, and that's how all these great California ranches were lost. There's just a whole series of them. Los Feliz is not the only one. Plummer, where you can go to the park in West Hollywood, there's Plummer Park. He claims that there were loans, and that's how they lost a lot of that ranch, and so on and so forth, including Hancock's land was where the tar pits are now, and that probably was lost to the Hancocks because of loans. So most of these had loan problems. But anyways, Los Feliz was one of the greatest ranches of Los Angeles County. It was described as the most fertile of the parks, one of the grandest, the springs of water, the coolest and most limpid. Well, that's by Horace Bell, and I don't know how accurate that is. He told us that the vineyards were the most productive, the meadows the greenest, and the cattle the fattest. He described the rancho as the liveliest and most romantic property in Southern California. I don't know if that's true. Anyways, he got into the story of loan sharking, and he claimed that there was Don Antonio Feliz, who becomes indebted to Jew Solomon. You know, we got to call him Jew. That's not very nice, for $16. And I don't know, I guess that was supposed to be a lot of money. This is the same Don Antonio Feliz who had money in good hard silver and gold coins. So I don't know how this prosperous man would have become indebted for $16 and lost his whole ranch. But at any rate, that's what we're told. And we're told one day in 1863, Don Antonio Feliz, and there's some questions about who was with him, but at any rate, he caught smallpox. And by 1 o'clock, he was speechless. I guess smallpox was a problem back in Los Angeles back then. And at 3 o'clock p.m., his best friend, lawyer, Don Antonio Coronel, who was the first mayor of Los Angeles once it was part of California, comes to the ranch and proceeds to write. And witness Don Innocente, finally somebody other than Antonio. Everyone's been called Antonio in this story. And this man, Don Antonio Feliz, is allegedly speechless for hours before the will was written, so it couldn't have been dictated by the master of the ranch. Claims were made that the will was written by Dan Antonio Feliz by nodding his head in assent to the terms of the last testament. Well, there are also claims that his head was propped up on the bed and somebody was moving it to assent to the terms, and this man was already dead. Okay, so allegedly during this bequeath, where everything has been given away, possibly from a dead Spanish Juan, there is a bequeath of 12 gentle mares with pinto stallions, a colt for each mare for Los Feliz's godson Juan Sanchez, household furniture divided equally between Los Feliz's sister-in-law, and the true riches of the Verdant Ranch, evidently not encumbered by the big $16 Jew loan, were bequeathed to Don Antonio Coronel. Coronel had the option of selling everything for a price he saw fit when he saw fit. Well, that doesn't sound good. And again, this loan seems quite inconsequential if there's all this stuff. You know, what's going on here? Why is the ranch being lost over a $16 loan? That's obviously a myth, probably not what happened. But Bell claimed this was the start of the great downfall in this canard. Now, this element of the story is certainly anti-Semitic, and here's the thing. We're going to talk about Isaiah Hellman, who wasn't yet operating the first bank in Los Angeles with a required non-Jew until 1868. Yeah, there was a problem with Isaiah Hellman actually running a bank because he was Jewish. And so his partner was the former mayor of, not the mayor, I'm sorry, the governor of California, Downey. But anyways, Solomon Lazard, who wasn't really the first banker, he opened a deposit window out of his store in 1859. Allegedly, he founded this private bank called Lazard, Freres and Company. And by the way, that is a huge financial concern now. Lazard married Joseph Newmark's daughter, and Joseph Newmark is the founder of Los Angeles' first temple. And you'll hear more about that later in this episode. It's Congregation B'nai B'rith, and it's known as the Wilshire Boulevard Temple. But at any rate, according to Bell, Don Antonio Los Feliz was a bachelor who lived with his sister, and Petronilla, a niece who was raised like a daughter. And in all my years of looking into this myth, I've never found a picture of Donna Petronilla. We're talking about the curse, the Los Feliz Curse, which is going to be instrumental in changing Los Angeles history if you just tuned in. This is the Karl Gerber Workplace Lawyer Show. I'm Karl Gerber. I'm a real workplace lawyer. I'm also a historian. Well, at any rate, this beautiful lady, Petronilla, came back from the Pueblo once the smallpox contagion was over. She's back at Rancho Los Feliz. She's 17 years old. She's described as a fairy-like creature who was tall, slim, graceful, and beautiful, and educated, but possessing a fiery spirit. And she told the new master, Cornell, "The one shall die an untimely death, the other in blood and violence. A blight shall fall upon the face of this terrestrial paradise. The cattle shall no longer fatten, but sicken on its own pastures. The field shall not longer respond to the tiller. The grand oak shall wither and die." Persons other than Bell inserted something about tongues and flames. "And the wrath of heaven and vengeance of hell shall fall upon this place in the floods." So what place is that? That's Griffith Park, right? And that's Rancho Los Feliz. And now things get a little dicey. At this point, a myriad of demons could be seen floating in the air like vultures in the general vicinity of the Tahangas, where the sun could be seen sinking below the Tahangas. Petronilla described the utter horror of these demons riding storm clouds, lashing the clouds as the vaqueros lash cattle. There was darkness, rolling thunder, flashes of lightning and rain falling in torrents. Boulders grinded and crashed. This is Griffith Park, mind you. The royal oak was destroyed. Oaks withered in tongues of flames. The meadows were gone in Rancho Los Feliz. She proclaimed no man would ever enjoy a profit from the rancho. Misfortune, rime, and death will follow. This curse sucked all the life out of frail Petronilla, and she died on a tiled floor of cloister-like veranda. Petronilla rose briefly to speak to a priest after she died. Sounds like Anita Orchid Helms, who was just told the devil was tempting her. This is the myth of the Los Feliz Curse on the Karl Gerber Workplace Lawyer Show. For unexplained reasons, Don Antonio Cornell allegedly transferred the land to his lawyer, and this appears untrue. Again, this is Horace Bell, who was a lawyer writing for the Porcupine newspaper in the 1800s. In 1868, Cornell sold the portion of the ranch he did not own before Don Antonio Feliz allegedly died, for $10,000 to Charles V. Howard. Horace Bell reported that for $8,000, the water rights in the springs passed to the Los Angeles Water Company. Now, again, this is a ranch that was lost over a $16 debt to a lender, so I don't think it was lost to a lender, and it's just some anti-Semitism here. Then we get Leon, a.k.a. Lucky Baldwin. Ever heard of Baldwin Hills? Well, that's Lucky Baldwin. He's certainly a colorful California figure. This is a gigantic man, and not gigantic in height. He's a horseman, and he came on a wagon train barefoot from the east, and he was robbed by Brigham Young, who you may have heard of. He started a university in Nevada before settling in San Francisco, when he purchased the ranch. We're talking about the Rancho Los Feliz, which is Griffith Park. And much was spent on improvements, including a new home for Baldwin's brother, General John M. Baldwin. Was he a real general? Probably not. Everyone goes around with these titles back then. That the ranch was overrun by grasshoppers, which caused all the cattle to die. And Lucky Baldwin, a man, by the way, who died with a $20 million fortune not much after the turn of the century, was forced to mortgage the ranch. I doubt Lucky Baldwin had to mortgage this ranch. His fortune when he died 25 years later would be considered $1 billion today. But you have to keep in mind that nobody had $1 billion when Lucky Baldwin died. So this man was very rich. I don't think he was forced to mortgage Griffith Park. I don't see it. But at any rate, in 1879, there was a brush fire in this land, and Thomas Bell purchased the land after John M. Baldwin left. And John M. Baldwin was later murdered by Mexican bandits. So the curse is following this ranch. In December of 1882, Colonel, he's not a real colonel, Griffith J. Griffith, not Griffith W., but Griffith J. He's not the movie person. He buys the land, which by this time is, the hilly section of Griffith Park. It's still 4,071 acres. And Horace Bell claims that Griffith was a Welsh prince. I don't know about that. Griffith was born on a farm, which kept him slightly better off than destitute, I've read. So I don't know how he was a prince. But in 1884, again, there was an unprecedented electric storm due to thunder. The best part of the ranch was swept away to the sea. Ooh, presumably all in the narrow streams that travel through Griffith Park and enter the ocean almost 40 miles away in Long Beach. This night was referred to as the Great Crescenta. The ghost of Don Antonio Feliz was seen, along with demons who were plainly riding the waves and directing torrents onto the land. Baron Griffith, now he's a baron, escaped to town at midnight. Griffith was able to rent a small corner of the ranch that had not been destroyed. And this is roughly where the merry-go-rounds are. If you ever rode the merry-go-rounds, you've probably heard that music. And that music is very old. It's from about 1908, just out of interest. But back to Griffith Park after Griffith gets it, and he's got just a small corner of the ranch which hasn't been destroyed. And that's roughly where the merry-go-round is. He's got a tenant that operated an ostrich ranch. Visitors came into the area to spectate the ostriches. Now, I don't know if this tenant had any connection to Remus Helms, the most important man in Sun Valley, California, who operates a cosplay ostrich ranch not far from Tahunga's and happens to be a long-standing sponsor of the Karl Gerber Workplace Lawyer Show with his $5.14 billion in funding and 14 inches of endowment. Yes, Remus Helms, a frequent character on this program. Anyways, back to the Los Feliz Curse, which is Griffith Park. Horrid things continued on the ranch, including 2 men who arrived young but left with gray hair. There were frequent hauntings at a festivity to entice city officials to take the ranch as a gift. The ghost of Antonio Feliz seated himself in Griffith's chair, my God. He then invited the guests to dine with him in hell. Why Don Antonio Feliz went to hell? Well, I don't know. That's not really explained. He wasn't supposed to be a bad man. But in 1903, the curse was blamed when a temporarily insane Griffith convinced his wife was conspiring against him, and he shot her in the face on the roof of the Arcadia Hotel in Santa Monica where she lived. He was convicted and served a 3-year term in San Quentin. He never reconciled with his wife. Now, if you would like to see pictures of what this all looks like, you can go to employeelaw.com/vintage LA, and I've got all kinds of old pictures of all these people. Don Antonio Feliz, Griffith Park, the whole thing. You are still listening to the Karl Gerber Workplace Lawyer Show, and we're still talking about Griffith Park and the Cursed Ranch. Now, for significantly more than 10 years, Griffith tried to unload the ranch on the city of Los Angeles. Many speculated he couldn't sell the ranch, and he sought out the bequeath of the tax write-off. However, during at least part of this time, he was selling off parts of the ranch for sizable profits, notwithstanding it being cursed. Others believed he wanted to unload the ranch due to the curse. After he was released from prison, many believed he was intent on gifting the land to Los Angeles to try to get his name back, which had been thoroughly ruined when he shot his wife in the face, and I always thought he poked her eyes out in the hotel in Santa Monica. Not until February 18, 1910, did Griffith Park become property of Los Angeles. Some believe that Los Angeles' only interest in the acquisition were the Los Angeles River water that passed through the park. Van Griffith, Griffith J. Griffith's son, was instrumental in building the park and providing adequate funding. In 1913, Griffith J. Griffith volunteered to provide funding for an observatory. And a lot of people were claiming the city was very slow to act because Griffith J. Griffin had a lot of ill repute. In 1929, there was a disastrous fire in Griffith Park and then a flooding. In 1933, there were 9 men who died in another Griffith Park fire. The myth of the cursed ranch lived on. The park flooded in 1934 and 1938 after the 1938 flood of Los Angeles River. The river had to be covered in concrete, and that's why it's concrete now. By 1977, the Hillside Strangler worked the area, instilling fear in everyone hiking in the park. In 1979, I suffered my first significant bee sting while drinking a lemon lime soda by the Observatory. And again, if you go to employeelawca.com/vintage LA, you can see some vintage pictures of this. Now, I want to mention an interesting fact that I personally remember because I was listening to TV this day, October 10th, 1985. I think everyone refers to it as the Pendulum that's down there in Griffith Park Observatory, kind of when you walk in, and it's called the Foucault, a Foucault. Well, I just kind of find this to be an interesting little piece of Hollywood, because there is nothing like Hollywood like the Griffith Park Observatory. But the day that the pendulum stopped spinning because of a vandal, well, that's the same way Orson Wells died. He died that day, same day. Orson Wells, as we all know, had the most frightening broadcast ever on radio that people thought was real. And then he went on to make a movie that a lot of people consider the greatest movie ever made. So when that pendulum stopped swinging, I don't know, maybe that just took the life out of Hollywood. Personal experience, back in 2006, I wrote The Legend of the Lizard People, and it was set in 1939, and Pentralina was supposed to be a very old woman who held magical Mayan lizards, little pieces of like jewelry, and she gave them to a barrister named Clover Shiner when the court forced him to represent her on a land claim. And the deed becomes an issue. And deeds are Los Angeles history. And I was able to mix her inheritance to myth number 2 of Los Angeles, which is the cursed treasure buried on the Cahuenga Pass, not far from the Hollywood Bowl. And then we had the Mayan thing and the Mayan catacombs underneath downtown Los Angeles. That's myth number 3, one of my favorites. And my book has us, or my characters, going into these tunnels that really do exist in downtown Los Angeles, but they were more so for streetcars. And I don't really know if Mayans were using these tunnels ever to have religious practices. But the lizard that was magical, it was like magical realism, unlocked the grand room of treasure at the end of the Mayan catacombs under downtown Los Angeles at the end of the book. So that is the curse of Los Feliz Ranch. And I think, as someone who's lived in Los Angeles many, many years, I think that had the land not been donated to the city of Los Angeles, our city would have developed differently. And that's why I think that this crazy man, Griffith J. Griffith's donation to the city is so significant. Now, if you know anything about Los Angeles history, it was westward bound. We start out in East LA or downtown, and we just keep moving west. And by, 1910, I mean, there's still some people living by Vermont and Wilshire, not far from where Bullock's Wilshire was. That's where the rich were living, maybe even until 1930. There were grand homes on Wilshire Boulevard. Then they were knocked down, and they became commercial through Gaylord Wilshire, who was a real estate agent who did one lot at a time to change the fact that Wilshire Boulevard was zoned for residences. But if you keep moving to Vermont, and we know you get to Vermont Avenue at Wilshire, and you go north, you're going to hit Los Feliz, and you're going to hit Griffith Park. And certainly by the 20s, or even probably 1915, very influential people started moving into Los Feliz. I do believe that the Chandlers lived there, who owned Los Angeles Times. A lot of people were moving there. And I think if Griffith Park didn't become a public park like it is, I think it would have become canyons like Coldwater Canyon and Beverly Glen and Laurel Canyon that feed a certain part of the San Fernando Valley that has become very populated. And there's actually more, or was before the coronavirus, more TV and film production there than most people would ever imagine. We have CBS Radford in Studio City. Most of Burbank is post-production, animation, same with North Hollywood. But we have Beverly Hills, which connects by Coldwater Canyon, which goes to Studio City. And so the movement was westward, and it went to Beverly Hills instead of that Vermont area. I mean, Beverly Hills was all right in like 1919, but it really wasn't much. You had Fairbanks and Pickford living there. It was pretty rural, and it really, those canyons were almost worthless for many years, Bennett Canyon included. So it took a long time for those canyons to become expensive and have massive homes there. And I believe that that would have happened in Griffith Park. It wouldn't have been Bennett Canyon. It would have been Coldwater. It wouldn't have been Beverly Glen, the Sherman Oaks. It would have been the Griffith Park area. And that's where all the people that were upper middle class or some wealthy people would live there. And I think that Burbank and Glendale would have a different demeanor to it if Griffith Park didn't become a public park. Whether it became a public park because Griffith J. Griffith was just trying to get on the better side of Los Angeles again, well, probably that's a big part of what happened. Was he concerned about a curse? I don't know. There were a lot of bad things that happened there. There were a lot of fires. There are still a lot of fires. And lightning, back then when there was less metal, maybe it was striking these trees. It just wasn't a worthwhile place. And I don't really know how great the farming would be there because you can see you go on hikes. I know a lot about soil doing hillside development and construction, and you can see the soil is bedrock. The trails that they've chiseled out bedrock. Bedrock is real hard. Some of it there is withered and it gets a little flaky, but you can't farm in that stuff, and it's just a bunch of hills. And so I don't really think that that was great farmland. I don't think it was a great place. Maybe the lower portions were closer to where the freeway is, but a lot of that is mountains and hills and would have been great for residential homes, mid-century homes, homes hanging off cliffs, maybe mansions on each side in the foothills, but I don't think it would have been as valuable as Bell made out in his myth. And, maybe for a while it would have been a riding academy, but the best thing was for it to become the Great Park of Los Angeles. And it is our great park. It's like, in New York, they have the Great Park. Well, our Great Park is Griffith Park. And it's big and has a lot going on there, and some of what's gone on has changed, but I just believe that grant that he made, the criminal man, really did change how Los Angeles came out. Okay, so we've been talking for a while. I think we actually need to go to